Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am hoping everyone's 2023 is off to an incredible start. I received several emails asking about my New Year's resolution presentation from last year. So, by special request, I'm back with the Resolution Revolution. As you may remember, according to research, 92% of people will have given up their resolutions before the end of January. Most people will do so even earlier. In fact, Strava has dubbed the second Friday of January Quitter's Day, and this year it was January 13th. Every year, only 8% of people actually make it past January with their resolutions. But it's not our fault. Our brain actually works against us in making changes, even changes that we want to make. But there are ways around it. And this presentation will help you set yourself up for success to help you make the changes you want to see in your own life. Now, today we'll start with some data about resolutions. Then we'll talk about why the brain hates change. We'll look at how and why our habits form, and then talk about what needs to happen to get your brain on board to make those changes you want to see. We'll look at an 8-step plan to help you be successful in achieving these resolutions and prepare some ways in which the brain may try and sabotage you. But first, I want to talk about why resolutions are important. And to do so, I need to start with a concept that science calls self-efficacy. Now, self-efficacy is basically what we believe about our own abilities to face what life throws at us. And our self-efficacy is determined by our ability to reach the goals that we set for ourselves or not. Now, when we reach our goals, our self-efficacy increases, and we allow ourselves to aim a little bit higher the next time. When we're not successful, our sense of self-efficacy decreases, and we lower our ambitions in the future, and we expect less from ourselves. So our ability to successfully go through with our resolutions has a direct impact on our sense of self-efficacy. Now, self-efficacy isn't something that pops up and then goes away. It's a constant awareness that we have, and it's influencing our mood whether we're aware of it or not. Now, our mood influences every single thing that happens in our day, which ultimately affects our perception of our sense of happiness and our general well-being. So being successful at our resolutions or at any behavioral change that we want to make in our life can have a much bigger impact on us than we might be aware of, because everything in our body is connected and has a domino or ripple effect. Now, who makes resolutions? If we take a look at this data from a study done by Finder, it shows that as we get older, we tend to make less and less resolutions, which you can see in this chart here. Health-based resolutions are always at the top, and interestingly, career appears last. So resolutions are very much about our sense of wanting to improve as people and how we feel as individuals first and foremost. And if we look at this chart, we can see that despite what we know, a very high percentage of people genuinely believe that they will go through with their resolutions. And while it tapers off as generations get older, but it's still pretty high. And if we look at the reasons why people feel they won't go through with them, the primary reasons all lie with the self. People believe they either don't have the willpower, they're too lazy, or they'll forget. Now, unfortunately, this already shows signs that people have developed negative judgments of their self-efficacy. And this, as we discussed a minute ago, can carry over into other areas of their lives. Now, the truth is that our own brain dynamics actually create a very powerful headwind against us whenever we want to make change. And let's take a closer look at that. So just some facts here to get to know the brain, which I always think is fun. Despite weighing about 3 pounds, the brain consumes 20% of your daily calories. The brain isn't fully formed until about 25 years old. And you may not be surprised to hear that the part that is the last to develop is the reasoning, more thoughtful or self-reflective part of the brain. It makes 10 quadrillion calculations per second that travel at a speed of 268 miles per hour. In these neurotransmitters are the information that manages every single thing that happens in your body, your senses, your movement, your thinking, and your feelings. And our brains come with a kind of pre-installed operating system that we've inherited from our ancestors. And the primary objective of this operating system is survival. That means that your brain is not on the lookout for things like, is this a healthy choice for you right now? And it's more focused on making sure that you get home alive at the end of every day. And it's up to our conscious rationality, that last part of the brain to develop, to help us decide what's good for us or not. Now, one of the key defaults is that the familiar is always more attractive than the unfamiliar. The brain will always lean towards what it knows for better or worse, because it knows it can survive it because it already has. And in order to free up vital cognitive energy to continue being vigilantly on the lookout for threats, the brain rewires itself to automate any behavior that we repeat. We see this in the fact that we don't have to learn how to walk, talk, or tie our shoes every day. Once we've perfected an action, it moves from our conscious brain to our subconscious brain. But the brain doesn't only do this kind of wiring with our motoric actions. It automates our likes, our dislikes, our emotional reactions, and our behavioral responses until they become habitual. So let's take a quick look at how the brain creates habits. The second brain default we're going to look at today is how the brain chooses. It moves closer to the things that give it a sense of pleasure and avoids the things that give it displeasure or feel like punishment. And sometimes they can get complicated and mislabeled in human behavior, but that's for another session. Today, we're just going to stick with the fact that brain likes things that make it happy and dislikes things that feel like punishment. Now, how we determine what we classify as pleasure or punishment comes through a lifetime of experience and conditioning. For some elements, we're told by our cultures, our religions, or families which behaviors are rewarded and which ones are punished. For other things, we rely on our direct experience. We go through a process of encountering something, let's say a dessert. We try it, we like it, our brain pings our pleasure response, and we remember that for the next time. Now think of something you like. Do you have to think about it each time? Probably not. You know that you like it, and that's because it's an archived behavior. And it's the same process with things we don't like. Maybe we walk down a dark alley, something scares us. The next time we see a dark alley, we're going to avoid it. And with time and repetition, or in some cases, even immediately, these get locked up as decided facts in the brain and become automatic for the future. If you don't like oysters, you don't need to try them 15 times before you avoid them completely. Maybe you've tried them once, maximum twice, and then that decision gets made and archived for the future. And then each of these behaviors inevitably gets connected in the brain with a bunch of associated experience. Maybe we had a delicious cake in Paris. Maybe we had a memorable cake at our birthday when we were 6. Or maybe the happiest day of our childhood included ice cream as part of our happiness. Now, all of these associations become potential trigger points, which is one of the reasons why behaviors can be so hard to change, as there isn't just one way in, there's multiple ways that you can trigger the same desire for something. Let's say one of the behaviors you want to change is to drink less wine. One solution is obviously not to bring it home, skip dinners out, or going to healthy non-alcoholic restaurants, or perhaps even seeing friends less. But what happens when you pass by a restaurant and you get a scent of a delicious Italian pasta that makes you think of a special dinner in Italy, and suddenly the only thing your brain is thinking about is a delicious glass of Chianti? And we'll talk about how to solve for this in a minute, but for right now, the key point is to understand that the change you're trying to make is much more of a tangled web than you might have thought. So if in the past you haven't been successful at making behavioral changes that you wanted, it's completely understandable. You have a giant series of networks in your brain that are making it very difficult for you, which incidentally look like this. Now, today we're going to be talking about resolutions, but what you're going to see here is valid any day of the year. If you want to make changes for your birthday, or you're going through a breakup, you've made a breakthrough in therapy, any moment that you're looking to make changes in life, what we're going to look at today will come in handy for you. So let's talk about what needs to happen in order to get your brain on board. And there are 3 important things to consider if we want to successfully integrate a new behavior. And the first is how we think about what we're trying to do. Our brain is constantly doing something called a risk-reward calculation, meaning we figure out if something is worth doing. And usually the effort that's required to make a change and the amount of time that's needed ends up not really being worth it to the brain to go the distance, and so we give up. I'll give you an example. If you're comfortable on the couch one night binging Netflix and it's freezing cold outside, and I call to invite you to a dinner that's an hour drive away, chances are you're going to decide that it's not really worth it. If, under the exact same conditions, I say, come to this dinner because your favorite entertainer is doing a private impromptu performance, you'd probably re-weigh your options and, chances are, you'd conclude that now it's worth it to go. So since any change you're trying to make is probably going to be considered by the brain as ultimately unnecessary, it's important to frame things in a way in your own thinking that gets your brain willing to get off the couch. The second thing you want to do is reward yourself for any and all progress, as well as actively track your growth. The brain loves progress. Seeing movement forward will give you that necessary hit of dopamine to increase motivation. And finally, it's key to just keep it up. As James Clear said in Atomic Habits, the key is to start with repetition, not perfection. Research has shown that the minimum time required for a new habit is about 66 days before it starts becoming automatic. The more time you spend with your new habit, the more importance it gains in your brain. One of the most important things you can do to set yourself up for success is to have a resolution strategy. And let's look at what that entails. Several research studies have identified something called the planning fallacy. It's an optimism bias that causes people to grossly underestimate the amount of resources it's going to take to get something done, whether that be time, money, or energy. Remember, at the beginning, we saw that 80% of Gen Zers were confident that they were going to achieve their resolutions, even though we know that that's unlikely. And this is where the importance of a plan comes in. You wouldn't go on a trip without planning, you wouldn't buy an apartment without doing proper preparation, and you wouldn't make changes to your house without gathering information first. Resolutions and behavioral changes are no different. Simply saying, I'm going to eat healthier will get you nowhere. It's an intention, but it's not a plan. So the first thing you want to do is actually invest the time to thoroughly think through the change you're trying to make. Thinking about something is one of the ways we let our brain know that it's important to us. It's in the process of thinking it through and developing a strategy and a plan that we communicate to our brain that we're serious about making this happen. There's a saying in neuroscience that where attention goes, neural firing flows and neuro connections grow. And what this means is that the more attention you give to this new behavior, the more your brain will work to hardwire it into a habit and make it easy for you to adopt. And we do that with these 8 steps that we're going to be going through one by one here to help you make your change happen. The goal here is to find ways to spend time with this change so that in one way, shape, or form, you're interacting with it every day with your thoughts and actions. And the first step is to articulate a very specific goal. When was the last time you walked into a bar and said, I'll have a drink? or sat down at a restaurant and just asked for food? Probably never. We make specific requests. The same goes for the brain. I want to lose weight is not a helpful objective. I want to lose 10 pounds by June 15th is a fantastic objective. It's concrete, it has a deadline. This makes it very real to your brain. And the more it's real, the more the brain will help you work out a strategy to get there. Now, we talked about how you frame things to the brain and how we want to focus on these new habits being pleasures, not punishments. If you think of dieting, for example, as, now I have to stop eating all of the foods I love, you are very unlikely to be successful. It's very important to frame the language you use and how you think about it in a way that's positive and beneficial to you. Remember the concert to get off the couch example? This is where you draft that motivating twist. Now, the next exercise you want to do is a good old-fashioned pros and cons list, since we're looking for concrete motivation. This will really help you go through it and make it real. What are the added benefits you're looking for? What's your driving motivation? And when everything goes wrong, it's important to know why we're doing something. If we aren't clear on our why, then there's no reason for us to continue. Even more helpful is your con list, because this will give you a sneak peek into the various excuses that your brain is going to try to lure you out of doing this throughout the process. This way, you know that these are your weak spots and things you'll want to keep an eye out for. It's helpful to hang this list up somewhere where you can see it in your house, next to your bed, on your fridge, in the bathroom. You want to be able to look at it every day, because this feeds into that repeat step. Then we want to break our big goal down into bite-sized objectives. The brain loves progress, but remember, it's always doing that risk-reward calculation. And if something seems too hard, too far, or too much work, the brain is going to shut it down immediately. For example, I want to lose 20 pounds is a huge task and very, very far away. However, I want to focus on losing 5 pounds every 6 weeks. This is both very clear and very reasonable to the brain, which makes it much more achievable. And of course, we all know that if it's not in our agenda, then it doesn't exist. So if you want to write more, block out time. If you're trying to save more money, make a note of the days to actively execute deposits. If you want to exercise, block out times in advance for 6 weeks on specific days. The simple task of integrating it into our calendars helps make it more serious and real. And once again, this goes back to the association network idea. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Then you want to visibly track your progress without getting obsessive, of course. Once you're able to see how much time and effort you've invested, you're much less likely to abandon ship. Think about those 30-day challenges. When you see 17 checks on the calendar, you're much more motivated to show up for day 18. Every time you add progress, your brain lights up and creates more incentive for you to continue. Now, one pro tip here is that you want to track progress on something tangible and not digital. According to UCLA studies, the brain gives more importance to paper and to things that are in our physical world. And this is valid even if you're a digital native. Now, as you're mapping out your strategy, it's a good idea to think of some small rewards that you can give yourself as you're ticking off your goal points, as well as one final big reward if you make it to the end. This activates your pleasure and reward circuit and reaffirms this process as a good thing, which will increase your motivation. But be careful, because rewards are not all made equal. You want to focus on experiences. Why? Because they give you multiple opportunities to feel good, from thinking about which experience to choose, to anticipating its arrival, to living it, to remembering it. All of those moments and phases positively reinforce that association network and help reframe the change as a positive thing. Objects, on the other hand, create a sense of impatience and lack immediately. So if you choose an object to give to yourself, you're going to start immediately suffering the fact that you want something and can't have it. This is a negative association. And you can end up focusing so much on needing the object that you may actually ditch the behavioral change just so you can acquire it immediately. Now, for the bite-sized objectives to celebrate, you want to choose smaller experiences like a spa day or a cooking class or even simply an afternoon off. They also obviously shouldn't touch your objectives. So if you're on a diet, we don't celebrate with food. If we're trying to save money, we don't celebrate with purchasing something, and so on and so forth. Then for the final reward, you should choose something larger or more meaningful that can provide you with positive memories, like a graduation ceremony or some sort of ritual that you can create with your family. Again, this helps strengthen the positive association network around the behavior. And as we discussed earlier, there are multiple ways to trigger a craving of an old behavior, and we can slide off of our plan if we find ourselves unprepared. So once again, let's say you're on a diet and there's an impromptu lunch at a restaurant that you don't know. Because you're caught off guard and maybe feel unprepared, you can be at risk of forgetting your goal. And perhaps there's an item on the menu that you recognize but also doesn't fit into your diet. And because it's familiar, remember that golden rule from the beginning, you can end up ordering that. And this can immediately cause you to feel guilty, like you failed yourself, and inadvertently activate that punishment network. So you want to have your response strategies ready beforehand. Thoroughly go through your weekly habits and understand where it is that you might stumble. If you're not drinking, have a range of non-alcoholic choices in mind beforehand, just in case they don't have your preferred substitute. Or think of the multiple options of food that could work in the case of dieting. Or think about what could possibly get in the way of you spending extra time with kids and how you can either make it up or prevent it. Being very realistic about the potential potholes and sabotages along the way is part of the strategic process. Now, what to do if you mess up, and this is very, very important, do nothing. Don't dwell. Don't beat yourself up about it. This shouldn't ever be framed as win or lose. Just immediately pick your new routine up where you left it off without any excess emotional response around it, or the negative feelings will start activating that unwanted association network and you can give up immediately. And finally, we want to use visualization exercises. There's a lot of scientific evidence to support mental visualization as both an emotional regulation technique and a performance tool. In this particular case of making behavioral changes, it's fundamental to visualize the process and not the goal. We want to focus on imagining how it is that we achieved our objective. And one exercise I recommend is to imagine that you're meeting a friend who you haven't seen in a while for coffee. And this version of you has already reached your goal. Your friend wants to follow your success exactly and wants to know how you did it. With your eyes closed, speak out loud and tell your friend, in as much detail as possible, how it is that you achieved your goal, what steps you took, where you overcame challenges, how you persevered, how you feel now that you've reached your goal, and what you're looking forward to in the future. How do your clothes feel now that you're thinner? How do you feel with more money in the bank? How do you feel about having launched that business? How do you feel now that you're spending more time with your kids? What advice would you give your friend as best practices in going through with it? And the more detail you can imagine in your mind, the better. So sometimes things don't go as planned, as we know. And certain thoughts or streams of self-talk can creep up and throw us off and cause us to self-sabotage. These are the voice of doubt and fear. And this is what happens when we're subconsciously afraid that we're not going to be successful. And so we try and get in front of it by giving up first. So going through this list of things that are sayings that are listed here, having a healthy and motivating answer to these self-sabotaging sentences can actually help you better navigate that moment when and if it presents itself. And as we discussed in the beginning, our ability to be successful at our resolutions actually has much more of an impact on our lives than we might think. And this is why it's really important for us to take this process seriously if we decide to give it a try. Now, I hope you enjoyed this session and these tips on how to make successful changes in your daily habits, or the resolution revolution. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to connecting with you in another session.